didn't help this girl. There are other girls, right? So help them. There's a little black book.
Welcome back to Global Media Network, LLC. Passionate World Talk Radio is a wholly owned subsidiary of GMM. And today on Lest We Forget Historical, Lisa Skinner, Betsy Wurtzel, and I, Lillian Cauldwell, hosts, will be talking about Alzheimer's, specifically how it affected our husbands, in my case, and more especially in Betsy Wurtzel's case, for pre-onset Alzheimer, and how she took care of him, or what, quote, she's known as a caregiver, and how it's affected her life and her son's life. Because when somebody has Alzheimer's, it not only affects the person who's taking care of them, but also the entire family. So welcome to the program, and we will begin first with Betsy Wurtzel. Oh, forgot, not thinking. This is National Hispanic Month, and we want to go a shout out saying that everybody should take the opportunity to learn as much as possible about the Hispanic community and also listen to their music and to their podcasts, because we are truly universal. And now, Betsy Wurtzel.
Hi, Lillian. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. September is World Alzheimer's Awareness Month. September 21st is World Alzheimer's Awareness Day. Those of us who have lived with it will never forget. It's for you, the public, to know. Alzheimer's is the number 6 killer. 1 in every 3 people will be diagnosed. My husband, I'm going to show you his picture because we need to put names and faces to this disease. Now you can see that. That's my Matt. And I was so deeply affected by Alzheimer's. My mother-in-law had it. And when my mother-in-law was diagnosed in 2000, I didn't even know about Alzheimer's. And I worked in the nursing field. We were never taught. It was called, went by different names. It wasn't called Alzheimer's back then in the 70s. And even in the 80s, as far as I know. Matt's grandmother had it, and we just thought, she's senile. My dad was affected. My older brother, had undiagnosed memory problems when he died. Matt was 56 when he was diagnosed. He battled it for 10 years. Thankful that he progressed slowly. It was my experience that it was a battle to get a diagnosis and to getting all the way through to getting decent, dignified end-of-life care. And my opinion is it shouldn't be a battle. I hope now in 2023, soon to be 2024, can't believe it, that doctors are more knowledgeable and that they will believe the person and their families when they say there's a problem here. Now, where my husband used to go to his primary care doctor, they started, while Matt was still alive, doing the pre-screening, withdrawing the clock. Wish they would have had that back in 2010. Matt was diagnosed in 2010. Looking back, he probably started in 07, 08. And how it started was forgetting where things were in the house, not knowing his way around town. He was driving between 2 lanes. He was not functioning at work. I only knew a little bit about what was going on at work. Matt was, I took Matt to the neurologist, and they said, oh, he's too young for Alzheimer's. He's depressed. I took him to a neuropsychologist, and I didn't know 13 years ago what I know now. And she accused Matt of being non-compliant and said he couldn't possibly be that bad. And of course, I told Matt before the test, please cooperate. Then, of course, I yelled at him for not being compliant. And he said, Betsy, I was compliant. I told her I couldn't remember. Now, think about this, folks. And Matt isn't the only one. I've heard this from several people that I have been in contact with. The tester has the audacity to blame the person. They're coming to you for help and you blame them because they can't remember. That's why they're coming to you, because they are having memory problems. Why do you think people would make this up? So Matt told me she showed me things I couldn't remember. And because I didn't know back then what I know now, I just, went on with that information. I knew it wasn't correct. And I took Matt to a psychiatrist. He was on antidepressants. He was on stimulants. It wasn't doing any good. And then when Matt told me, this was in May 2010, that he didn't know what time Sunday school was. He didn't know how to tell time. And that's not depression. Going back to the neurologist, and I still listen. He doesn't know how to tell time. That is not depression. He has Alzheimer's. His mother had it. It's in his family. Treat him, put him on, the medication that was available at that time. And I went to like 3 different neurologists, and they all said he's too young. And like I said, I hope that thinking has changed. It affected my life deeply because your income is cut. And this is what happens when people have early onset Alzheimer's. They are on disability. Their earning income is cut. And it was an adjustment to have me at home. Excuse me. And being that I didn't know at the time about early onset Alzheimer's or how it affects your vision, I used to get mad at Matt for not seeing things in front of him. And why are you driving between 2 lanes? And how come you're not seeing stop signs? This was all, part of it. And I have to tell the audience, I really want to encourage people, listen to Tifa Snow videos, because when I heard her talk about visual problems and how Alzheimer's affects your vision, I didn't get frustrated with Matt anymore. And I can't impress enough. Education. There wasn't the education back then. There's a lot of education now. I almost envy caregivers now because there's so much information. Thank God for people like Lisa Skinner, who has a show that is giving people information. I wish there was people like Lisa 13 years ago to be able to be educated. There's so many support groups, different podcasts now. I wish I knew about resources in my area, and I did not know about resources in my area. That's one of the reasons for chatting with Betsy, is to provide people with resources so that you don't make the same mistakes that I made. I interviewed someone who lives the next town over that's an elder companion, a death doula. Had I had known about her, I would have hired her. I also wish that I had hired a geriatric consultant to help me navigate hospice. Fortunately, my hospice team that we had was the one from hell. It was a horrible experience. Hopefully, nobody else experiences that. But between diagnosis and Matt's death, my life completely changed. Alzheimer's took away, yet I found my voice during Alzheimer's. I found a purpose. Very grateful to have met Jeannie White. She saw one of my videos. I used to go in my car. Alzheimer's brought out the advocate in me. It brought out things about myself I didn't know that I had, like a voice and a spine. And Jeannie saw one of my videos, because I used to do videos on caregiving and raising awareness on Alzheimer's. And Jeannie White, who's station manager, Pastoral Talk Radio, called me, and I went on her show, did an interview, and Jeannie asked me to speak weekly. And I was just, wasn't expecting that, nor was I expecting to eventually have my own show. And this is what Alzheimer's, Matt's journey did for me. It opened up doors. Never did I think when I went in my car to raise awareness that people would actually listen to me. I just didn't think anyone would listen. My family doesn't listen to me except for Josh. So who else is going to listen? And when people would comment, it would bring tears to my eyes, because when they said, "Oh, Betsy, you're brave, you inspired me, you're my hero," I never saw myself as that. To me, all caregivers are heroes. It's very powerful, and it's very what would I call it? Inspiring to me. When people inspire me, I get inspired. And being brave really had nothing to do with it. I was mad. I was angry at the medical community because they would not listen to me. They would not listen. And it wasn't just with Matt that they wouldn't listen. It was with my son, who has a cognitive disability, and my own health. I hope doctors listen. And I can tell you, if a doctor doesn't listen to you, go to another doctor. Keep going until you find someone who will listen to you, because you are paying for that and you deserve to have a doctor listen to you. And I really became a fierce advocate. I really had a fight for Matt, dealing with the hospice. That could be a whole nother show. Getting him on hospice was easy. It was getting the help during hospice that was difficult. I knew Matt was dying. I knew that, but they didn't believe me. I called when Matt fell. They wouldn't come out to assess him. They sent the social worker to my house, and the social worker had the nerve to tell me I called hospice too much. I told her Matt had a headache. Matt never complains. She told me he couldn't possibly have a headache. Well, I put her in her place real quick, because you do not disrespect me or my loved one. And I told her, you do not talk to me that way. You're talking to me like I'm stupid. I'm not stupid. I know how to give medication. Give medication for years. I said, you're giving the same thing. I'm telling you it's not working. That's insane. It's not working. I told the hospice nurse Matt was dying. Oh no, he's not dying. He's walking around. He's actually shuffling, and he's eating and drinking. I said, I'm telling you, he's walking around, but he's dying. He's terminally agitated. 2 weeks later, folks, my husband was dead. We need to listen to our intuition. I told that social worker, you need to listen to caregivers. We know our loved ones better than anybody. And if someone tells you that someone has a headache, you better believe them. I said, who are you to tell me that my husband couldn't be in pain? Do you know what a dying brain feels like? Because I don't, but I get migraines and I know what that feels like. Why people think that those who are mentally disabled or have any kind of dementia can't be in pain, I cannot figure that out. But they do have pain. My dad had pain before he had dementia, and of course he had pain when he had dementia. It's just very frustrating to it was a very frustrating, aggravating experience, stressful, to get him up to that hospice unit. When he went up to the hospice unit, when Matt went up, I knew he went up there to die. They didn't believe me. After 2 days, they said, oh, Betsy, now we see what you're talking about. Hello, why do you think I would make this up? Why? Oh, and let me tell you this story. I gave the medication exactly like they said. And Matt talked that whole Saturday night. He fell out of bed. I called up hospice. I said, I gave the medication, did not work. Matt fell. Are you going to come out? That hospice nurse had the nerve to tell me she didn't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, let me tell you what I know. After I'm done talking to you, I'm going to call the Medicare and complain. I'm getting Matt off of this hospice, and I'm calling your regional manager and tell them I'm out of here. Oh, no, don't do that, Mrs. Sloan. I'll call my nurse manager. And then they said, Matt can come up to the hospice unit. Do you want that? And I said, yes, I'm asking for help. I said, I'm having chest pain here. I'm going to end up in the hospital. It really affected my life. It affected Josh. Josh was great with his dad. He was proud to be a caregiver. And Matt, Josh had experience with his grandma too, and seeing his grandfather. And Josh was deeply affected. When Matt died, he didn't know what to do with himself because that became part of his routine, taking care of his dad. And it really, I encouraged Josh to go out. And, children, no matter what their age, are affected by caregiving. Let your children be children. Let them go out. Let them have fun. Let them vent to you. I always kept the lines of communication open with Josh. Let them vent to you that they don't like changing a diaper. They don't like Alzheimer's. Doesn't mean they don't love their father or mother or whoever it is. They're expressing their emotion. Because I'll tell you, if you cut communication down with your children, guess where they're going to go to? They're going to go to their friends for advice, and their friends may not give the advice that you would. Therapy, self-care. Self-care is essential. I'm a Jersey girl. I'm going to say it straightforward. Self-care for the caregiver is literally a matter of life and death for you, the caregiver. There's many people who die during the course of caregiving for their loved one. They die afterwards, or they have diseases and illnesses. Take care of yourself as much as possible. I know sometimes it's really hard, and it's really hard to find that balance because I felt guilty being away from Matt. I did. I felt guilty putting him in that hospice situation. But I learned to let it go. Go for counseling. I went for counseling mid-journey with Matt, and I am going for counseling now. And not many people talk about after the journey, caregiving post-traumatic stress. You could call it moral injury if you want. You could call it stress injury, but whatever you want to call it. Caregivers have it. Finally, hallelujah, it's being recognized. Wasn't recognized 18 years ago, but it's being recognized now because people are having these conversations. We need to have these conversations. We need to put names and faces to this disease and personalize it. Otherwise, people are not going to know. And I said 7 years ago, and I'll say it again, folks, get out of the dementia closet, shine a light on this disease on your journey. And I'm very happy to see people with any kind of dementia speaking up, showing their journey. I'm seeing more people in social media showing their journeys with their loved ones. I am happy about that. And as a matter of fact, 5 years ago, when I was on Jeannie White's show, it was like from a lion to get caregivers to talk. They don't want to talk. They were, I don't know what it was. They were embarrassed. They didn't feel comfortable. But now they're talking, and that's great. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Our next host to speak will be Lisa Skinner, who wrote a book, as you will imagine, Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's. And she's also a special therapist, behavior therapist for almost 30 years plus. and she knows quite a bit about Alzheimer's. So I'm going to let her take it from where Betsy left off. Lisa?
Okay, thanks, Lillian. Betsy's story is just one of millions of similar stories out there in the world of people who are either caring for somebody living with Alzheimer's disease or one of the other brain diseases that causes dementia, or they have a loved one living with these diseases. As she said, it is the sixth leading cause of death in the United States, but it's also become the number one leading cause of death in the UK, in the Netherlands, and in Finland. We are going to be seeing a reckoning coming in the next 22 years. The World Health Organization and the Alzheimer's Association have projected that if we don't find a cure or a treatment for this disease, by the year 2050, the number of people who will develop Alzheimer's disease, and that's just Alzheimer's disease, is going to triple. It's a crisis looming over our heads. And as Lillian mentioned, I've been doing this professionally for 30 years, but like Lillian, Betsy, I too have personal experience. My grandmother was diagnosed almost 50 years ago. And since then, I've had a total of 8 family members that have lived with one of the diseases that causes dementia. And it was probably part of why I ended up choosing this path as my professional career, because I felt like I really understood and could relate to others who were going through this. And Betsy, I don't know if you would agree with me, but my experience has been probably the number one thing. I was on a guest on a show a few days ago, and the host asked me, what is it you would want people to know that might help their situation be a little easier? Because this truly is one of the hardest diseases any family's ever going to have to deal with. And like I said, Betsy's story is just one of millions of similar stories that people go through. It is hard, and there's no two ways about it. So my answer to that question, and it's kind of similar and along the lines of what Betsy said, is do what you can today. If you're starting to see signs or symptoms of your loved one with memory decline or cognitive decline, even if it hasn't been diagnosed, because I'm going to tell you that most people are not diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease till they're well into their mid stages. And the reason why is there's several reasons. Number one, in the beginning of the disease, in the early stage, the signs and the symptomology is so subtle that it's almost impossible to differentiate between normal aging forgetfulness, mild cognitive impairment, and something more serious going on like a brain disease, which causes dementia. That's the reason why most people are not diagnosed until they're already into their mid stages. There is no test to diagnose Alzheimer's disease. The only definitive way to determine if somebody had Alzheimer's disease is after they've already passed and an autopsy is performed on their brain. So the challenge for all of us is the doctors really have to go through a process of elimination to determine what it's not, and then based on what it's not, whittle it down to, well, this is looking now like Alzheimer's disease. But it's not set in stone. And I'll give you an example. Those of you who know who Chris Christopherson is, he's a very famous actor and musician. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and treated for it for 3 years. Then somebody suggested he go in for a Lyme disease test. And guess what? It was positive. He did not have Alzheimer's disease, although he was treated for it for 3 years, put on medications, and it turns out he had Lyme disease because Lyme disease mimics some of the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease because it gets into the brain stem. So it's very easy. There are a lot of things that can mimic Alzheimer's disease symptoms. And our best opportunity to determine if somebody is suffering from it really comes down to eliminating what it's not. And unfortunately, he was not given a Lyme disease test at the time, and it turns out that that is what he had. So back to the question I was asked in this interview, and my answer for everybody is the same as Betsy's. Learn everything you can possibly learn about this disease, either once you start noticing signs, then after the doctor tells you this is Alzheimer's disease, because you need to be prepared for anything unexpected. And the three of us will tell you by experience and through knowledge that your whole entire world will be thrown into the unexpected with this disease. And the more you know about it, the more you understand what it's doing to the brain of your loved one or the person that you're caring for, and why the brain is causing behavioral issues and personality changes. This is all part of the disease. The more you're prepared for the things that show up on a minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day basis will make your life and your relationship with your loved one or the person you're caring for so much easier. And I don't know, Betsy, would you concur with what I'm saying based on your experience?
Oh, definitely, Lisa. I can tell the audience from my own experience. When my mother-in-law was diagnosed in 2000, there wasn't the information available. So I didn't know about, hallucinations, paranoia. I just thought she was being a witchy woman.
Yeah.
She was telling people I was stealing from her. I didn't find this out till later. And I wish I handled her hallucinations better, but I didn't know any better. So when Matt started to hallucinate, I was educated. I handled it better. And it's just better for you, the caregiver, and for your person to know what to.
Not only that, but to know how to effectively respond to a hallucination. Because as you know, Betsy, it is counterintuitive the way we should be responding to somebody who's hallucinating or suffering from the paranoia, which are all very common with this disease, because the way that we instinctively want to react to these occurrences is really the opposite of what is a best practice. I'll give you an example. I mentioned my first experience was with my grandmother. And when I was about 16 years old, after I got my driver's license, I went over to her house. She only lived a few miles from us, and I had a close relationship with her. And I remember it will be, just imprinted in my brain for the rest of my life, this experience that kind of seemed like it came out of the blue. So I went over there. We were sitting in her living room. We were having a conversation as we normally did, catching up on things. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she started telling me about these birds that lived in her mattress and would come out at night and peck at her face. And I'm like, whoa, that sounds so far-fetched. But this is my grandmother. I've never known her to lie. I've never known her to be dishonest. I have no idea what she's talking about, but out of respect, I didn't argue with her or contradict her. Then she starts telling me about the men that had been trying to break into her home to kill her, and the rats that were running all over her house. She even pointed to a wall and said that they were invading her home. And so the next thing I did, I said, oh my goodness, Grandma, this sounds terrible. I said, let's go in your bedroom and you show me where these birds are coming in and out of your mattress. So we walked in there. I threw the covers off of her bed. There's nothing to see. I pushed the mattress up, looked underneath it. There was nothing to see. Not that I expected to see anything, but the thing is that she was so convinced that these things were real, and that is what happens to people who live with Alzheimer's disease. And there's nothing anybody can do or say to convince them otherwise. So I said to her, and trust me, I was a teenager. I had no training in this whatsoever at the time. I said, Grandma, I'm not really seeing where these birds are coming from. I said, help me out here. Can you give me some more information? And she looks me just straight in the eye. And she said, oh, Lisa, they're there. Trust me. She said, they're just very, very clever, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant response. And since then, since I've been doing this, counseling families, thousands of families for the last 30 years on how to live best, how to live a best life, either as a loved one, a caregiver, and the person suffering from the disease. And I have learned the best practices for responding. One of the things that I have learned about people who live with dementia do cover. They are become masterful at kind of explaining themselves away. And it was really a brilliant response, but it was also my little grandma. And it was so cute to say, oh, they're there. They're just very, very clever. So in that particular example, our gut reaction would be to want to correct them, steer them back into our reality, because we want them to be healthy. We want to fix them. That's just a natural human response. But in this situation, it's probably the worst thing any of us can do is to contradict them, argue with them, tell them that what they're saying couldn't be true, because in their reality, it is the absolute truth. So we teach that you need to enter their world and join their reality and go along with it. That's a best practice. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with that because, well, there's many reasons. They feel that it's not truthful, but it is the best response to avoid the situation escalating into what we call a catastrophic reaction, and it getting really out of hand and causing a total meltdown. So these are all things that you as a loved one or you as a caregiver would need to know, so you can minimize the risk of these situations getting out of hand and turning into really big deals. Now, Lillian, you also have experienced Alzheimer's near and dear to yourself. Your husband suffered from it, and you were his caregiver. So how does everything that Betsy and I have been saying resonate with you based on your personal experience?
We moved to Pennsylvania in, 2016. And we had hooked up with an osteopathic doctors because that's mostly what they had out in the country. We were out in the country with the Amish and the Mennonite. And when I complained about my husband's lack of communication, spending 30 minutes on one page, seemingly to forget how to respond, he says, well, when you get that old, things start happening. And I said, he's not even 80 yet. And I said, his mom had Alzheimer's, and her mom had Alzheimer's before her. And from what I understand, you can trace it all the way back through the line of generations of the women in his family that has Alzheimer's. And so I kept on bugging him about it. And finally he said, okay, fine, I'll send you to a neurologist. So we went to the neurologist, and the neurologist put him through a series of tests, called me into his office. This all took under 15 minutes, so they can fit us into the 12-minute slot that is allowed for each doctor to have for each patient. I was very impressed with this. The only time I ever saw them move fast. And he called me into the office and said, and I quote, find a nursing home, dump him in, forget him, and start your own life. That's what was said to me. So I whipped out the cell phone, placed a call to my son, and said, in a very agitated voice, just what the doctor had said. And my son said, calm down. It's going to be okay. We'll talk later. And I said, fine. So I took Barry home, and then I started calling up, at least in the state of Pennsylvania, they have a hotline called about mothers finding homes or something like that. And it's basically, since women outlive men, of course, it's mostly for women to be put into nursing homes. So I called them up, and we went around to the different places. Meanwhile, I had interviewed a young doctor who was considered a top 1% in the country for working with Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's patients. I called up her office, and because I had just interviewed her doctor, I got an appointment with him, lickety-split. She was in New York City, so I rented a limo to take us into the city because I wasn't going to put my husband on a bus, as suggested by my daughter-in-law. It was a pain to travel with before he had Alzheimer's, and I can't imagine what it was like with somebody who really had no awareness of where he was. So we went in, and she put him through 2 days of testing and pretty much told me what I'd already suspected. And about a month later, we were accepted into a nursing home. We moved into the nursing home, and we were in independent living, and things got gradually worse. I would say the worst thing was he tried to take a shower, didn't understand how it worked. And even with his Alzheimer's, men don't like to ask for help, and they don't like to ask questions for whatever the reason. Their male gene prevents them from doing that. So he almost singed himself. And when I went in to help him, he put his fist through the wall. And that's when I decided it was time for me to leave the apartment. And I went over to the nursing station and told them what happened. And that's when things began to unravel with him. Now, he received medication, but he didn't receive any additional help. There was a waiting list to get into the Alzheimer's unit. And basically what I did was work with him. And so he did hallucinate and think somebody wanted to meet him somewhere. So one day we waited 3 hours in a hallway for a person who would never show up. I would take him over to the adult daycare and the Alzheimer's units, and he would stand and curse me for 15 minutes, and they would finally take him in. But what really did him in was that he became sick with pneumonia and a blood infection, and they could not get rid of either. So finally, in desperation, they gave him a very large dose of steroids that completely wiped him out totally. And he died a week later.
So what advice would you give our audience that you would recommend to them that you wished you knew back then that you know now that you have lived this experience and gone through it? What would you tell them if they're just now beginning their journey with this disease?
One of my biggest tips is to look up on the internet who are considered the specialists in Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's, and contact them and find out, ask them your questions. There wasn't anything like that back in 2015, 2016. And to tell you the truth, doctors, regular general doctors, I guess you call them, they don't know. They just don't know. It's like they don't know anything about nutrition either. So don't go and ask them about what kind of diet you should be on, because they won't be able to tell you. They get 1 week of training in medical school to handle Alzheimer's and dementia. 1 week. And yet when they graduate from medical school, they're given a license to practice medicine on your spouse. So my advice is to find out the number one person in your city, town, state, call them up and find out. Just don't go on somebody's, oh, I think you ought to see Dr. So-and-so. The other thing is get yourself a good geriatric physician who is more prone to know and to help you understand where your spouse is. And if you do come up against a jerk like the neurologist that I spoke to, that advised you to dump your spouse somewhere and then go on with your life, leave immediately, because they don't have any empathy for you. They do not understand that in their mind, all they see is somebody who's stupid or worse. Their brain is empty. Therefore, you have no further use for them. And folks, that's not what being married is all about. In sickness and in health. Yes, I'm bringing that up. Your husband, your wife, they get sick, they have Alzheimer's. You do not divorce them. You do not leave them. You made a promise to take care of that person. Good times, bad times. Barry came out every now and then and recognized who I was and thanked me for taking care of him and being there and not leaving him alone. And if you truly love somebody, you don't walk out on them, because whether you think it or not, they know whether you're there for them. One of the stories Barry used to tell me was his mom had Alzheimer's. His father would get there when the facility opened up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he left when they kicked him out at around 9 o'clock. And he spent the whole day holding his wife's hand and talking softly to her. If you marry somebody, you live with somebody, you love that somebody, you don't walk out on them. That's my advice. The other thing is to try to put yourself in their shoes and understand what they're going through. And when
and
you
also understand that what you are witnessing is the disease that's changing, damaging their brains, that they are not trying to be difficult. They are not trying to be violent. They are not intentionally behaving in these, bizarre ways that you're witnessing. This is the disease. And that's another thing that I think the three of us would agree everybody needs to realize and hopefully be a little forgiving. I think Betsy used an example that once she realized that what she was seeing was the disease and not her husband trying to be difficult, it was easier for her to deal with that situation coming up. Right, Betsy?
Yes, yes. So I had to tell something funny. I'm so glad Matt kept his humor because Matt was a jokester and he kept that during his journey. But near, like at the end, he would say, "Oh, I love you guys. Thanks for helping me." And then next minute he'd be, "You blank, blank, you don't do anything." And you have to laugh because what else can you do? you know? I
You
have to
have to
ask you
have
a
a sense of
question,
humor.
Lisa. Yes, yes,
And a
that's
lot
for sure.
of patience, a
Yes.
lot of patience.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Lisa. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this. I find it interesting that different people have different hallucinations. Like you said, your grandma with the birds. With Matt, it was men. He saw men with big heads and that were hurting him. And the hallucinations Matt was having was causing him agitation because he was afraid and he was afraid for me. So have you seen that in your practice? Or do you know why people hallucinate different things? I just find that fascinating.
Yes. That's a great question. And the first thing I want to say is no two people experience these diseases in the same way. Everybody goes through it differently. And a lot of what we're seeing, like in the hallucinations, what somebody might be suspicious about or paranoid about, all has to do with their own life experiences. So that's really kind of what's haunting them are things from their past. And I can honestly tell you that my grandmother's whole entire family was lost in the Holocaust, and she was scared to death to get into a shower after her Alzheimer's disease showed up, because that was part of her life history. And she was in her long-term memory banks, it was present. So she was scared to death to get into a shower because she thought that these men that were breaking into her house, and she expressed this, that were going to kill her, were going to do it while she was in the shower. Where does that come from? From your life history. So maybe what Matt was experiencing had something to do with something in his life history, in his past. But yes, to answer your question, what I've seen is a lot of the behaviors that we see have something to do with their past life history. I've seen other people who were Depression era, grew up during the Depression, and they were in their 80s and developed Alzheimer's disease, and they would hoard food. And we figured out, and it's also documented, that they may be hoarding food because their life experience when they were younger, because keep in mind with Alzheimer's disease, the short-term memory is the first thing to go, but we retain our long-term memories pretty much throughout the entire duration of the disease. So in that situation, that person might be remembering how difficult it was to even get something to eat. So they're hoarding food because that was their life experience. So does that answer your question?
Yes. Yes. Yes, it does. And it makes a lot of sense. When my dad had open heart surgery, I thought he was hallucinating, but he had kept this secret for so long. He saw someone get murdered when he was in the Navy. And he was yelling, I couldn't stop them. I couldn't stop them. And he said he saw someone get thrown overboard. Now, I know they did that back then. If you were considered a danger, if you were gay back then, they threw you overboard. And I had asked Matt's sister, was Matt ever abused? Do you know if he was abused? And she said not that she knew of. But, I really wonder if he was, because of what he would say in the hallucination. And you're right. Like, if we don't know someone's personal history, all of it may not be a hallucination. It could be a memory coming back. One woman in a support group showed me her husband. Well, I guess he was hallucinating, but it kind of wasn't. He was back in Vietnam and getting agitated and thinking, like, you know what? This is my own personal opinion. It's just a mental hell to me that these poor people are living this over and over again in their mind with no escape. I felt so bad. I felt helpless watching Matt hallucinate. I felt bad for him because I couldn't stop it from happening. I could just reassure him, and Josh and I became great improv actors, throwing everybody out. But I will say this, because I got to say it before. I learned, and Josh and I learned, a deep unconditional love that I can't even express because there's just no words. But when you are so bonded with someone and they can no longer do for you and you do for them, the love connection is so strong. And I want to encourage people, talk to your loved ones, visit them. Hearing is the last sense to go. I believe God created us that way so we could say goodbye to our loved ones. They could hear us. Keep talking to them. They hear your voice. They know you're loved. Dementia robs the brain, doesn't rob the heart of love. And I firmly believe that.
And I've heard a lot of people say, yeah, I don't bother to go visit my loved one anymore because they don't know who I am. So what's the point? They do know who you are, even they.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't believe it.
They know they're connected to you in some way. They may not be able to say your name. They may not know where you fit into their timeline in their life, but they know you. And yes, it is not a waste of your time because they cherish those moments that you spend with them. My recommendation is if they're calling you by another name, it's because their short-term memory is probably short-circuited out for a temporary period of time. They're pulling from their long-term memory and they're placing you somewhere in that past timeline, but they do know that you belong in their life and there's no question about that. So just go along with whoever they think you are for that time. And then maybe next time you visit them, that short-term memory will be back on and they will know you by your correct name and how you fit into their life. And this is how the disease works.
And one more thing. It's going to be upsetting to hear to some people. If your loved one becomes lucent and says, I want to be let go, see if you can honor it. Because they know they're not going to get better and that they really don't want to continue living that way. And the reason why I'm putting this in is I had a discussion with my doctor and he says, I've been trained to save lives. Let me save his. And I said, we've been through this 3 times with the pneumonia. and the blood infection, and he'll just continue coming in here. And he wants to be let go. And that's why you need a living will, folks. Sorry, you're just going to have to face the question, when am I going to die? And you're going to say to yourself, now's the day that I'm going to get and write up and have it certified by my lawyer as a living will, because the hospitals ask you that. Not only do they ask you that, they ask you who your doctor is and how it affects when they have Alzheimer's. That's the first thing they ask you when you bring in a patient. Does he have Alzheimer's? And if you say yes, they're going to ask you if there's a living will on file and ask that it either be brought to the hospital or transferred to the file. But if your spouse ever comes to their senses, even for several minutes, and asks to be let go, honor that request. Because like I said, they know.
Yeah. And one of the things that they commonly say when they're asking to be let go is they'll say, I want to go home.
Yes.
And that means they're ready to go to God. It means, It doesn't always mean that. Sometimes they're looking for a place they lived when they were in a younger time of their life. But a lot of times they say, I'm ready to go home. That's exactly what they're referring to. And just to Lillian's point, and I think all three of us would agree with what I'm going to say, start having these conversations when your loved one is still healthy.
Yes.
Find out what their wishes are. Find out get all the legal paperwork taken care of. And then if they're able to express to you when they're healthy and they say, when I get to this point, I don't want to be hooked up to anything to prolong my life, honor those wishes. But you'll never know what their wishes are unless you start having those conversations when they're healthy and be prepared. It's all about being prepared. Right,
Absolutely.
guys?
And I'll tell you one more thing. My son told me if I had been power of attorney, I would have kept Dad alive. And I said, well, I'm a power of attorney. And your dad told me that he expected to get Alzheimer's, and we did have a living will in place, and that he wanted to be let go. I said, it's easy to be kept alive. It's a lot more difficult to let your loved one go in peace. And I said, you have to remember, this has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them.
I agree. And power of attorney too. Power of attorney, medical and financial. You will
Absolutely.
definitely
And get all that stuff out of the way while your loved one, your grandparents, your parents, whomever, is still healthy and can participate in those decisions. It's very important. They're hard conversations to have, but they're necessary conversations to have.
We know that death is not a popular subject in the United States, and that people would rather kill themselves rather than have the conversation of death, which is an oxymoron, even of we speak. But the thing of the matter is, this is a conversation you really need to have somewhere in your life. Barry and I talked about it a year after we got married. Yeah, because it was that important to us to get it down in writing, so that if the unexpected happened, an accident, car wreck, train wreck, airplane wreck, somebody shoots you by mistake, happens all the time. Whoever is living will have an easier time handling the estate and handling the remaining members of your family. Because despite what you hear, death doesn't bring families together. Most families start fighting as soon as the loved one has 2 feet in the grave and hasn't yet been officially buried or cremated or put on a stack somewhere and let to rot. The fact of the matter is, death is not a pleasant subject to talk about, but it's something, if your family history, cancer, epilepsy, diabetes, lupus, They all lead to death. In addition to,
just like Alzheimer's disease, it is without a doubt the elephant in the room. It's larger than life. It's not going away, no matter how deep you hide your head in the sand or try to sweep that elephant under the carpet. So we really need to face these things head on. And so have these conversations. What's the plan with your family? Who's going to be the primary caregiver? Who's going to help? How are we going to pay for this before that loved one gets ill? It's going to make your life so much easier to deal with, because a lot of resentment and anger surfaces if these things are not worked out ahead of time. Wouldn't you guys agree with that?
yes, definitely. And on one further note, in January of 2024, Lisa Skinner will be running a first summit dealing with her book, Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's. That is not the name of the summit, and I'll let her tell you, but I want you to know that she'll be having a summit in the new year, and that you should look for her emails so you can sign up and get yourself a little more knowledgeable about Alzheimer's, dementia, and yes, even Parkinson's, because my dad had Parkinson's. And again, back in the 60s, they didn't have anything. And nobody bothered to tell my mother what she was up against. He got it when he was 50, and 25 years later, he died in his 70s. And it was a hellish trip the whole way. Lisa, so explain about the summit, and then please give your contact information.
Okay, thanks, Lillian. So I am in the process of organizing a summit. It's going to be at the end of January, so stay tuned, and I will be updating you on all the details as they unfold. But the purpose of the summit for all of you is for me to assemble speakers to the summit. It will be a free summit, and each one of the speakers that will be invited to speak at the summit will have expertise in aging. It might be somebody talking to you about hospice. It might be somebody talking to you about sundowning. It might be an elder care attorney talking to you about what paperwork you need to take care of. But there's going to be a handful of speakers, all experts in their field, talking about something related to Alzheimer's disease, but not necessarily have to be Alzheimer's disease, where you can get informed information and expert information, so you will be aware of some of the things that you need to pay attention to. So stay tuned. Oh, and my contact information, if you want to send me an email, is Dementia Whisperer and the number 1 at gmail.com. And if you send me an email, I will keep you on my list. So when I do send out the formal invitations and the announcements, I know it's the end of January, then I will send you the information if you're interested in attending, and take advantage of all the experts that will be sharing a lot of the information that would be really helpful if you are in this situation. And, you know, everybody has an Alzheimer's story, so a lot of us actually are in this situation. It's going to be a really great learning experience.
Betsy, please.
Wow, that summit sounds fantastic, Lisa. I wish there was something like that 13 years ago. Folks, take advantage of it. It's free. I would definitely hop on that invitation like ASAP as soon as Lisa puts it out. My email is Sloan, SLOAN, Betsy, BETSY 31 at gmail.com. I want to thank everyone for listening. I also just want to add real quick, think about, I don't mean to be morbid, pre-arrangements. I pre-arranged Matt's funeral a year before, and I'm glad I did. It's one less thing that you have to do. Have these conversations. They're important. Oh, thank you.
And not least but not last, or well, last but not least, TWR Network LLC at gmail.com. And folks, have a conversation with your kids, sons, daughters, and even your grandchildren, because once somebody in your family has Alzheimer's, it's going to affect the relationships. And more importantly, kids ask questions. So please tell them the truth. Don't make up a story about grandpa or about how they ate a duck and this was his food reaction to it. Or grandma, when she hit her head on the wall, that's why she doesn't know who you are and she cusses you out. You're not doing them any favors, because kids have the ability to have long memories between the ages of 0 and 18 years. And who knows, they may pass on some bad information to a friend who says, you know, my grandmother's been acting really strange. And they'll tell their friend what it is. And they'll say, oh, that's because they slipped on the skateboard. They didn't tell you the truth. Misinformation comes from kids as well as adults. So do yourself a favor. I know there are books out now that explain in very simple language what Alzheimer's and dementia is and how it affects people. Go ask your librarian, or Google it, or ask on Amazon.com, or ask AI. It's on Bing now. My blah, blah, blah has Alzheimer. How can I explain it to my 3-year-old? And you'll be surprised the answers that AI will give you on Bing. I'm a writer and I ask it plenty of questions and it hasn't laughed at me yet. Just food for thought. So thank you very much for listening. Don't forget National Hispanic Month. There are neighbors. There are also those people who are being caught in wars and rebellions down there. So understand them. Their music is awesome. So is their food. So live a little. Go to a Mexican or a Latino restaurant this weekend and enjoy yourself. You can find us on passionateworldtalkradio.com, youtube.com/PW World Radio _PW Talk Radio, Facebook.com less-we-forget-historical. Please look at the Facebook page. You never know what you're going to find. If you want something to be spoken about, please write it down, let us know, and we'll be more than happy to tackle it. Thank you all very much for listening. And remember, please keep listening. Thank you.